Yeah, so welcome everybody. Glad that you've all been able to make it. So before we get started, I just want to plug some of our other guest speakers that are going to be rolling up. But before that, I'll introduce myself. So I'm David York. I am the tech employer specialist for the central part of Kentucky and the eastern part of Kentucky. If you're interested in looking for jobs and you're in those areas, hit me up, especially toward the end of your classes, but at any point, just hit me up. As for speakers, we are currently at the Neurodiversity and Networking, Breaking the Awkward Silence with Erissa Duvall, who is just speaking. Next, we'll have Laura Williams talking about refactoring techniques, which is a little bit more of a technical talk, if that's your taste. And then Matt Ruberg talking about sustainable tech, basically keeping sane in a fairly insane industry. And that one should be pretty good. Matt is a great speaker and a great guy. Laura, I don't know, but apparently she is really technically competent. So that should also be really good. So tune in for both of those. They should be great. As a reminder, if this is for your class, make sure to fill out the Google form in your class to get credit for this. Definitely want to get credit if you're here. This is also obviously recorded, so down the line, if you want to refer back to it, please do. They're all on our YouTube channel. Don't know if you knew that, but now you do. In general, please try and keep yourself muted throughout the presentation, unless you're asking a question. You can always ask questions in the chat, and yeah, we'll also have time for Q&A at the end. So without too much further ado, we are joined by Erissa Duvall. She is an accessibility engineer and Microsoft MVP, here to talk a little bit about networking and neurodiversity. So I'll let her take it away. We're actually not able to hear you right now, Erissa, if you're speaking.
I'd like muted myself for a second there while I was taking a drink.
Sweet. No worries, no worries.
Yeah, let me get this. It's always a fun time navigating the share options. I'll actually turn off my camera for right now, just because that way I can kind of focus on the PowerPoint and see if I can get this to. The settings are being a little weird. That way I can just focus a little bit better on like the chat and the presentation. So yeah, this is neurodiversity and networking, breaking the awkward silence. And I mean, networking is something that is incredibly important. And it's been an absolute lifesaver in my own personal life. I mean, it's how I've gotten most of the jobs that I have had up to this point, from working at Western Kentucky University to working at where I work now with CVS Health, and Good Maps, where I worked just previously to this. It's the entire reason I was able to move up to Louisville, Kentucky from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and it is a huge part of how I got my current status as a Microsoft MVP, of which there are only like, I think, 3,500 Microsoft MVPs in the world. So it's something I worked really hard at for the last about 5 years. And again, I mean, it was in huge part because to get nominated for Microsoft MVP, again, you have to be nominated either by someone who already is an MVP or by a Microsoft employee. And so, I mean, that's, you know, inevitably going to mean you have to get to know those people. If you're not getting to know those people, they're not going to get to know you. They're not going to be able to consider to nominate you. So, and on top of that, I also am highly what I would consider neurodivergent. Got a diagnostic list that looks like someone just yanked an entire chapter out of the DSM-5. And so, like, I mean, I've kind of had to deal with like those issues when it comes to like networking. And just so you know, feel free to raise your hand or type things in the chat, like if you've got questions along the way, because I'm here to, as the slide says, I'm here to help you. I'm doing this because I want to try to help other people maybe not have quite the pitfalls when it comes to networking that I've had to deal with in the past. As was already said, Microsoft MVP. I'm also a Google Women Tech Makers Ambassador and a Department of Homeland Security Trusted Tester. I have done talks at here locally at different meetups, at conferences in the US, and most recently had my first international speaking appearance. So how I've survived all that, I am genuinely sometimes not sure, because public speaking has always been something that terrifies me, but I think it's the overwhelming want to help other people that kind of helps me get past that and do what I do. So again, networking, super, super important. You know, we depend on networking for both professional as well as our personal, like more casual sorts of connections. And in both cases, they can really heavily overlap. I think people forget that sometimes. Even getting into speaking and some of the roles that I have had throughout my working life, sometimes it's been the personal connections that I've made just goofing out out in public that have then led to me meeting people and telling them the things that I'm passionate about, telling them the things that I'm excited for and that I love to do, the skills I have. And then suddenly they hear about a role that's available and they say, oh, hey, such and such would love that. Erissa would absolutely adore doing that. So, you know, both sides, you know, never forget that both sides are important. Don't just focus on like the professional side of networking, but also the personal side, because both of them, they can totally help one another out. But I mean, when it comes to networking, and especially if you are someone that you would consider to be like neurodivergent, it can sometimes feel like a battle. It can sometimes feel like you're getting your butt kicked by networking and you're having trouble making those connections. And you might also, during this, you know, I mentioned neurodivergent, but I kind of prefer at times to use the term neurodiverse. And I do that because neurodivergent, typically people focus a little bit more on individuals who have a like specific medical diagnosis. But the thing is we're all neurodiverse, because neurodiverse is just talking about the fact that everybody differs in how they have experienced life, how they make connections, things that they've dealt with, and where a lot of the difficulty comes for us when it comes to like making those connections isn't necessarily just, you know, medical conditions can play into it, but at the end of the day, we all kind of have those people that we see them and we view them as, you know, successful. You know, you see the celebrity walking the red carpet, you see the really successful like CEO, and you think to yourself, that's who I want to be, that's who I want to copy, which isn't a bad thing. But the problem is a lot of times we get so caught up in trying to be exactly like those people that we forget that, again, we aren't all the same. We don't all have like the same sorts of ways that we travel through life, the same sorts of experiences. We don't meet the same people. We don't have the same like cultural backgrounds, the same religious backgrounds, the same friends that we've met throughout the years. We don't have the same goals, the same aspirations. And because of that, you know, we can't just pretend that we are exactly the same, because again, we're not. here, wait, my computer's acting a little silly. So basically kind of what it boils down to is, there was a quote that I actually found the other day when I was trying to think of how to kind of word this general thought. And that is, life is the most difficult exam. Many people fail because they try to copy others, not realizing that everyone has a different question paper. And this really kind of like gets further emphasized when we sometimes look at how things like public speaking and networking are taught to us. Because a lot of times, you take that public speaking class in college, or you have public speaking lessons in, your elementary through high school. And they tend to put a lot of focus on sort of the same methods of doing things. And it just, it's a good start, but because we're all so different, it's just not always gonna work that way for everybody. It's not a one size fits all necessarily. And that's why I really found this while I was looking up resources and whatnot. When adapting an existing idea, your goal is to get inspired by what the author accomplished and to use it to drive your own creative thinking, not to copy their approach exactly. Basically, what I mean by sharing this is, it's the be inspired, but don't just copy. So whenever you're looking at how you want to network, whether it be in your personal life or your professional life, it's okay to take inspiration from the things that you see work for other people, but don't beat yourself up if it doesn't work quite right. And don't be afraid to adapt it, to change it, and make it fit you. And so when you're working though to adapt how you network to fit with you, first off, it's important to don't rush. Don't think that you're going to be able to go out there and it's all going to go perfect the first time. It's going to take some time. You're going to have to kind of figure out okay, well, what are the people that I want to hang out with? What are the groups that work for me? Whether it be going to different hobby groups or going to specific kinds of tech meetups, as you are obviously if you're, if you're a current student, you're focused on getting those tech events in, take that time to figure out what ones are going to work for you. And be kind to yourself throughout the whole process. Because it's far too often that, if you think about it, who do you spend the most time with out of anybody in your life? Yourself. You're always around yourself. You're always kind of seeing how you're doing things. So you're going to be your worst critic. And you're the critic that you can't escape from. So you've got to, first and foremost, learn to be kind to yourself, learn to be patient with yourself. And sometimes that can be easier said than done. There can be those moments where you get into a social situation and you do something and you're like, oh goodness, I just screwed up so bad. I can't recover from this, and it's okay. You just gotta take a breath, take a step back, and try to remind yourself that, everybody's made mistakes. You're no different. It's okay. It's part of getting where you want to get in the end. So some things that can help when you're trying to get out there and start networking is kind of like I mentioned, finding events that work for you. It's finding the right environment. And I'm focused more when it comes to what I list in these, I'm focused more on virtual or in-person events, but really a lot of this, it can kind of apply to a lot of different situations. Because even going through social media, figuring out like how on social media you want to network. Part of it is finding the right environment, figuring out what social media outlets work best for you. Because if you're into specific areas, there might be certain social media websites that work better for you. Like if you're a designer, there could be like some designer specific websites that are better for you to network on, versus if you're a just general like tech person, other areas will work well. Then LinkedIn things and like Twitter and things like that can be like more just general everybody sort of social networking areas. When it comes to like meeting events, it's figuring out like what kinds of events work best for you. So like for instance, there's a lot of tech meetups in town that are at bars or very, very busy, like kind of restaurant sort of scenarios. And those don't always work for me. I have found that I have to really limit when I go to meetups that are at bars. I'll go to one if it's like a topic I really, really want to learn more about, because a lot of times then I can kind of overcome some of the barriers that there might be for those kinds of events for me. But in general, I skip those, and I'll go to more of the like presentation sorts of meetups where there's like a specific presentation going on and it's in like a conference room or something a little bit more subdued. Some people thrive in going to those more noisy, more busy sorts of environments. Some people don't. So that's something that you can take into account, like what sorts of venues are good for you, what kinds of is there a lot more of a social component versus like a presentation component, or are there just certain groups, like maybe you go to certain meetup groups and you find that they just kind of attract people that are just not into the particular areas of expertise or the hobbies and stuff that you enjoy and that you want to learn more about. And as you're doing that, you go to different ones, you're identifying the things that you like and dislike about each one and kind of narrowing it down as you go. And don't be afraid to reach out to an organizer either beforehand or afterwards, because you might be able to reach out to them and say, hey, like this one happened to be at a bar. Do you do them at different venues? Or is it always going to be at something like that? Or you might reach out to the organizer to say, hey, if I can't stay the entire time, is there a particular area that maybe is good for me to sit in? Because like that's another thing. Like once you actually go to an event, don't feel like you have to stay there. If you get to like an event and you just really, really are not vibing with it, maybe it's way too noisy, it's way too crowded, it's not comfortable for you, you might sorry, I've got to put my phone on do not disturb because it is pinging me a bunch. Like, I mean, it's, you don't have to feel like you have to stay. And if you're going to feel like rude by leaving early, again, that's where reaching out to the host can kind of be useful, because you might ask the host or even just let the host know beforehand, hey, I might not be able to stay the whole time. So that way, at least you've said something. And something that me and David were talking about before everybody joined in, if people are going to be super offended by the fact that you leave because you were uncomfortable or you had something that you have to leave because maybe you've got kids at home and you can't necessarily stay the whole time, or maybe if it's a event that's during lunch, you can't stay for the entire lunch period because you have to get back by a certain time, that's on them, really. You all you can do is you can try to control the parts of it that you can, alert them if you think you are going to have to leave. And if they're going to get mad about it, okay, well, maybe that's not the meetup group for you. Maybe that's not the people you want to vibe with. And also like giving yourself a time buffer when you are going to any kind of a networking event, even if it's virtual, because even if you're going to like a virtual event, you need time to like get your computer set up, get connected, test things beforehand. Giving yourself that time buffer, regardless of whether it's in person or virtual, you're controlling what you can control. You're giving yourself that buffer so that you don't feel rushed. Because if you're going to an event for the first time, especially, you don't want to feel rushed because that's just going to add stress. And maybe if it's an in-person one, I mean, this could potentially be something for like if it's a virtual event, but go with someone that you know. Even with a virtual event, getting someone else to go to that event with you, that maybe if you get confused by something, you can message them off to the side. Or in person, having someone else with you, that just so that you can have someone there and maybe be a little bit more comfortable at first. It's going to be very beneficial. Now, that in mind, I will say that from personal experience and what I've seen other people go through, if you do start going to a bunch of different like meetup events, you do start, especially if you go to ones where there's like a crowd of people that maybe they're into some of the similar things that you're into, you'll find that you steadily will make some connections, friend or professional, and it'll get more comfortable as you go on. Even when it's gotten to the point now for me, even when I went to London in DC, so all the way over in London, UK, I met like 10 people that I already knew. And I was in a whole other continent. Because just as you go to different events and stuff, you go to the same events, you start meeting a lot of the same people who also are going to those same kinds of events. And that does end up happening even if you're going to like conferences. Because there's a lot of different speakers who, like myself, they go to a lot of, the different same conferences as me because they're targeting the same topics or the same audiences. And also, once you're in any kind of an event, whether it's for professional purposes or for personal or professional, asking questions. And I will say too, specifically from like a neurodivergent sort of perspective, a lot of times with people that have certain neurodivergent conditions, they tend to info dump. And so you risk getting into this like state where you feel like you're taking too much control over a conversation, and that can make you feel very uncomfortable, make you very nervous. And that's actually where asking questions can come into play, because if you start to feel like maybe you're info dumping too much, you can turn it around and ask someone else, well, do any of you maybe have experience with this? Do any of you, there's those little like techniques that you can kind of use to sort of, if you think things are getting out of hand, redirect it and put it back over onto someone else. Let them take the wheel on the conversation a little bit. And then that's also where going with someone, if you're going to something in person in particular, that can also be very helpful for that, because the first few tech events that I went to, I tended to go with people that were a little bit more outgoing than I was, so they could kind of start the conversation, and then they'd turn around, ask me a question, and pull me in, so that I didn't feel as like I had to initiate that contact as much. Granted, that's gone away. Like me needing that as much has gone away for the most part, just because again, I've gone to so many events at this point that there's people there I can feel comfortable talking to at this point. And I do have some different resources. I will make these slides available to everybody. But these are just like some articles and such that I found while I was going through that they offer a lot of different interesting tips that can help with like if you find yourself struggling with networking in particular areas. Um, and again, like I know I put a lot of focus on like events, but it is very important to remember that networking isn't just about like some of the in-person connections. You can make a lot of, and I meant to actually have a slide for this in here and I forgot to add it, but like your social media, your virtual connections. If you have certain topics that you're very interested in, uh, I was talking a little bit about this at the very beginning before I actually started the slides, but like I'll connect with people that I see online that do topics of related to accessibility for like videos or podcasts and things like that, or people that are in like leadership roles related to accessibility. And that has been so incredibly helpful in helping me make different connections, um, and helping me like just get notified about roles that maybe I wouldn't have heard about otherwise. That wouldn't have come up in my job alerts had I not just been connected with people that were doing that hiring. Um, Now, it is important to not feel bad if like you send someone a connection request and they either outright reject it or they just don't respond. I've only actually had, I have been fortunate, I have only had one person in the last 5 years to ever just outright reject me sending them a connection request. Um, but it does happen. Um, I've also had like just really weird connection requests where I was like, I'm just gonna unconnect that person. And I mean, that's, it's something that you kind of, it will happen. Don't feel bad if it does. Um, and that also goes for like when you're at networking events. One thing that I will do a lot of times when I'm at networking events, I need to actually get this updated, but you can get like really cheap business cards from like Vistaprint, and I'll just have like a business card that has like my name, a little headline, and then maybe like a QR code that goes to like my LinkedIn or my various social media profiles. And that way, like I can kind of hand that off to someone, and if they throw it away without ever connecting with me, cool. If they connect with me, awesome. But I don't feel like I'm being pushy at that point. It's like, oh, okay, hey, here's this. You can just do whatever with this. Um, Versus sometimes, like people might be uncomfortable, at least at first, with reaching out to connect to people because they might feel pushy. I know I've kind of felt that a couple of times. Um, And if you don't have business cards, there are also options to share, like on LinkedIn. If you have the mobile app on your phone for LinkedIn, there's that search bar at the top of the app that you can click, and it has your QR code. And people do have an option where they can just take a picture of it and not actually connect right then. So it's options like that, just giving you different ways where you can try to connect with people and not feel maybe like you're rushing them, or just to make it easy so you're not getting tongue tied while trying to ask them if they want to connect. I guess with that, I want to say thank you. This actually went a lot quicker than I expected it to. Um, so I guess questions.
Feel free to unmute if you have any questions or anything.
Okay, looks like we got Dan Collins.
So, in regards to networking events, and you talked about venue as well. How many different events did you go to before you found the ones that you vibed with? I know you talked about, certain locations may not be the best for everyone, and you need to be able to, be comfortable with the people that you meet. So I was just wondering, how long did it personally take you to find that right, I guess, zone?
Um, goodness, it's like, I know when I initially was a Code Louisville student, I think in my first session as a student, I think I went to like 15 or so different events, if not more. Um, Granted, I kind of started to like, after about five or so, like 4 or 5, I kind of started to figure out, like, because I went to a couple that were like at bars and stuff, and I kind of started to at least figure out, like, oh, okay, well, these are some things that maybe I'm not as crazy about. Like for instance, there's like a couple of them that meet like at Akasha, which is like a bar downtown, and I it's not a horrible venue, but it's got a lot of like echo, I guess. Like there's not a lot of good sound uh buffering, or however you would put that, I'm not sure. Um so I have trouble like hearing people because I have an auditory processing condition. So like I kind of figured out like things like that steadily. Um which kind of helps me like target things more, because then I can kind of like, oh, okay, well, I know this doesn't work. So from there, it kind of goes to, okay, well, I can either contact the host if I'm not sure about the location, and I know things at that point at least to ask. Like if I notice it's at some place that I think is kind of a bar or a restaurant, I can kind of ask like, hey, you know, does this place tend to be kind of have a lot of background noise? You know, and I mean it's an ongoing thing too. Um, Probably one of my favorite ones is Louisville.net, um, and which it's at just like it's in like an office building in just like a conference room. So there's not, there's a little bit of a social aspect. There's a little bit of a like presentation time when I can just sort of be sitting there and just let someone else speak, and me just kind of be a passive. Oh, and Corey actually asked kind of a good like related question about whether or not I have a favorite remote event. Um, I haven't been to quite as many remote events. There is I'll have to see if I can find it. There's like a Cincinnati user group that I really enjoy that meets virtually. Actually, here, let's see if I can look it up just real quick I might be able to just pull it up on my meetup. There's also Granite State, a Granite State conference. Of course, I'm not going to be able to sit here and think about the name of it right off. Let's see if I can look it up real quick. But I haven't been quite as crazy about virtual groups to some degree, because, which it feels awkward saying that, just because I do tend to have a lot of like social anxiety. But I think like when it's a virtual one, I kind of feel like I'm just there, I guess. Which I mean, for some people that's fine. Some people, they're comfortable with that. Or like there's some of the virtual groups where they do the breakout rooms, and I don't like that, because then I feel like I'm forced to be in the spotlight for at least a little bit, whether I want to or not. Because at that point, it's like, okay, well, now it's like there's 5 people in this breakout room. If I don't say anything, I'm going to stand out for reasons I don't want to stand out. So yeah, it's for some reason, like I guess with like in-person ones, I feel more like I can choose a little bit more of like when I talk, or I can just sit there and be a passive listener and not feel out of place necessarily. And again, I mean, it's kind of that comes down to like the whole like narrowing down the things that work for you a little bit. I was trying to find that Granite State Tech Conference real quick so I could actually share it. Oh, there it is. Granite State Code Camp was the one I was thinking of, which if anybody's interested, I'll put it here in the chat real quick. The nice thing about Granite State Code Camp is it's a tech conference and it's hybrid. So it's virtual and in person both. And it's completely free. It's just run by a community college. So really nice. And that's the thing too, like I mean, if you want to like have, you know, conferences can be difficult for people to attend because there's usually like the expense of, you know, traveling if they're like only in person. But there are a lot of tech conferences that will be hybrid, or uh, like London NDC, for instance, they're in person and they live stream. And on top of that, if you wait a few months, because like to attend it when it's live streaming, you do have to pay to attend. But if you wait, I think it's like so many months afterwards, they do have all of them up for free so that you can kind of attend it in spirit, I guess. Or there's see if I can find the other one. Ah, there's one that's actually done by the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and the Linux Foundation. It's called Cubicon, and it's actually free to attend, and it's virtual. So like it's another one too. Like it's another good virtual one to attend if you're interested. I think they do have some paid events, but it's a good mix. Any other questions? Hopefully it means I shared enough to be interesting.
Yeah, maybe you answered all of them during the talk. That's okay too.
This is a kind of a different one for me because usually like when I do my presentations, it's like my accessibility one. So there's like a lot of I don't know, it's granted with those, it's usually I end up feeling like I spend 3 hours talking and I'm like, oh crud, I still haven't hit anything. And
No, I totally get that. I really do. Well, on that note, if nobody else has any real questions, we can always wrap it up early. Again, Erissa is in Slack, so if you want to ask her any questions later, please do connect with her on LinkedIn, and we'll post not only this recording, but we will also post any resources that Erissa wants to share, like the slides, along with it. And we'll probably have that up tomorrow if everything works out okay. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
And thanks everybody for coming. I'm still